This monument pays homage to Shamrock Rovers' former home at Milltown in the Irish capital, Dublin. The record 15 times champions played there for 65 years until it was sold by then owners the Kilcoyne family to property developers in 1987. Since then, they've never had their own ground. Rovers fans are hoping the Tallaght Community Stadium will finally end their ground-sharing nomadic existence. Work began on it back in 2000, but ceased the following year as the club ran out of funds. To rub salt into the wound, last season the Hoops were relegated to the second tier of domestic football for the first time. Since leaving Milltown, they've only won the championship once, in 1994.
That was the death knell of Shamrock Rovers as we know it. At the time, Louis Kilcoyne and the Kilcoyne family were going to Tolka Park and they were going to recreate the Shamrock Rovers on the north side of the city where the major draw for supporters was anyway. They were forward looking, this is not often spoken about. Normally they get the blame for selling it, and it was wrong to sell it, but they didn't sell it to make profit solely. They were trying to bring Shamrock Rovers back and bring it into the more modern European way.
Today, Noel King is coach of the Irish national women's senior team and is responsible for the development of the women's game in Ireland. During the 80s and 90s, he played for and coached Shamrock Rovers. He was a key member of the team during their glory days of the 1980s, mainly as player-coach when they won an unprecedented 4 league titles in a row.
Winning a medal with Rovers, it's winning the second medal with Rovers and being there for the start of the third year and knowing what had happened, I'm hugely proud, because I know I contributed. I know I was a key part of that. Not in the glamour sense, but I know it was a key part of it, and I'm proud of being that, and I'll carry that to my grave.
Only one player remains from the squad that was relegated last season, goalkeeper Barry Murphy. The Hoops are reliant on youth. Murphy and midfielder Jamie Duffy are prime examples. Rovers suffered an 8-point deduction for financial irregularities during the season and were relegated last November.
It's the most hurtful thing I've ever been through in my life to see thousands of fans standing around practically crying at the end. It was the end of an era for Rovers. It had been coming, to be honest, like things weren't being done right at the club, and subsequently it happened the day we got relegated. But there's a new horizon now with Shamrock Rovers. Things are going in the right way.
There's no doubt about that. They were top of the Aircom First Division after 17 matches and had games in hand on their closest rivals. Former Rovers centre-back Pat Scully is the man charged with taking the fallen Giants back into the big time. He's not got cash to splash, but he refuses to use that as an excuse and is confident he can fulfil the remit his employers have given him.
I try and set really high standards for everything, in everything we do, and the board had that ambition as well. And we want, as I said, we want to get Shamrock Rovers back where it belongs on the football field, but also importantly is that we get the name of Shamrock Rovers back to what it should be, and that's extremely high standards in everything we do.
Meet defender and fireman Ray Kenny. At 32, he's the veteran of the team. Relegation from the Premier League means all Rovers players are semi-professional. Unlike the pros, Kenny doesn't have the luxury of a free afternoon after a couple of hours training in the morning. He works full-time and fits his training around that.
It is difficult, yeah. Obviously for getting off time for training, the way I work, it's shift work as well, so there are nights that I need to get swaps. Usually the fellas who I work with, the guys here, facilitate me regarding getting time off for training, getting time off for matches, and that's usually how I cope with it. But it is difficult at times, depending when the games fall and when I'm supposed to be working.
Kenny's fire station in Dunleary is one of the quietest in the Dublin Fire Brigade as regards emergency calls. Nevertheless, there's never a dull moment for him and his colleagues. They're all trained paramedics too. Their life-saving training skills also include cutting people out of cars involved in accidents.
It is an adrenaline rush. When you get to the scene, you usually have to size it up pretty quick. Your training just kicks in and you do it automatically. It's only maybe when the incident is over and you go back to the station or back home that you think about what you've done. But at the time, you don't really think. Something clicks automatically. Your training kicks in and you just do what you got to do.
After seeing the club come so close to folding last year, the fans are just delighted to have a team to support. They're now owned by a fan consortium of Rovers devotees, the 400 Club. John Byrne, Rovers Director of Communications, is one of those. He's also a club director.
As the 400 Club developed, it was taken over by its members, i.e. the supporters. And as the club sort of lurched from one financial crisis to another, we became aware that, you know, things needed to change. And when the examinership came up, we supported it financially. We helped to keep the club going from day to day throughout the examinership, which lasted from March until the end of July. And during that time, we figured probably the best way to help the club out of the situation was if the fans acquired the club.
Rovers currently play their home games at Tolka Park, which belongs to 12-time champions Shelbourne, in front of crowds of less than 1,000. A far cry from the 56,000 plus who turned up for a European Cup preliminary at home to England's Manchester United back in 1957. They'd lost just twice in their first 17 league games this season, conceding a miserly 5 goals. If they score first, count on them to win. As recently as 2003, the team reached the second round of the Intertoto Cup. Nowadays, European competition is just a pipe dream. But if their ambitious young coach has his wish, it won't stay that way for too long.
When you take over the job of Shamrock Rovers, you can easily walk in and make excuses and say, look, the club's been relegated, we're doing it this, we're doing it that, we've got young players, it's a 3- and 4-year plan, which to me is rubbish, and I'll never go down that road. I expect us to win the league this year, and I expect that from myself, and I expect that from everybody at the club. And if we don't do it, then I will have failed, and I'd have no problem holding my hand up.
Football produces its fair share of fairy tales. The sad decline of Shamrock Rovers is certainly not one of them. But the move to their new stadium is still on the cards. Hopefully, it won't be too long before the Hoops are back where they belong.